Maurice. He's, of course, at Auschwitz today to mark 80 years since the liberation of that concentration camp, which was liberated by the Russians.
It was. Very significant to hear the King. He hasn't given many big public speeches in recent times. Particularly, of course, he's had a slightly slimmed down agenda of public visits because of his health concerns, but this clearly a significant occasion, and it'll be really key to hear what he has to say.
I was surprised that King Charles hasn't visited before, and that no monarch up to this point has done. I know they visited other concentration camps. I know they've marked the Holocaust in many different ways. It's one of the things that King Charles does work on, that remembrance of what happened. But it's quite startling, some of these surveys that are out this week to mark this 80 years, talking about how a lot of British Jews feel like they need to hide their Jewish identity.
Well, I'm hearing the King is about to speak, so let's touch in to Poland.
In Poland on International Holocaust Remembrance Day, as we commemorate 80 years since the liberation of Auschwitz, is both a sombre and indeed a sacred moment. It is a moment when we recall the 6 million Jews, old and young, who were systematically murdered, together with Sinti, Roma, disabled people, members of the LGBT community, political prisoners, and so many others upon whom the Nazis inflicted their violence and hatred. It is a moment when we recall the depths to which humanity can sink when evil is allowed to flourish, ignored for too long by the world. And it is a moment when we recall the powerful testimonies of survivors such as Lily Ebert, who so sadly passed away in October, and who collectively taught us to cherish our freedom, to challenge prejudice, and never to be a bystander in the face of violence and hate. Yeah. And in a world that remains full of turmoil and strife, and has witnessed the dangerous re-emergence of anti-Semitism, there can be no more important message, especially as the United Kingdom holds the presidency of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. As the number of Holocaust survivors regrettably diminishes with the passage of time, the responsibility of remembrance rests far heavier on our shoulders and on those of generations yet unborn. The act of remembering the evils of the past remains a vital task, and in so doing we inform our present and shape our future. Here in Krakow, from the ashes of the Holocaust, the Jewish community has been reborn, and there is no greater symbol of this rebirth than the Jewish Community Centre in which we are gathered here today. Standing on the steps of this wonderfully vibrant centre some 17 years ago, having encouraged its construction and taken immense pride in opening it, I was filled with a sense of hope and optimism at the life and energy that coursed throughout this building. So returning today, along with World Jewish Relief, of which I am extremely proud to be patron, that sense of hope and optimism has only grown. With their support, together with other generous benefactors, this centre has blossomed from the bud of an idea into an essential hub for the community. Ladies and gentlemen, in a post-Holocaust world, projects such as this centre are how we recover our faith in humanity. They also show us there is much work still to be done if we are not just to remember the past, but to use it to inspire us to build a kinder and more compassionate world for future generations. A world of which we can be truly proud. And this remains the sacred task of us all. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
King Charles recognising, looks like he's about to unveil something. Unveiling a plaque for the Holocaust Memorial.
Your Majesty, I know that I speak on behalf of all of us when I say that your words and your actions move us extraordinarily deeply, and your strength and your leadership in knowing what is right and following through what is right will be remembered and appreciated by not just those who survived the Holocaust, but by the Jewish community and indeed by the nation, the Commonwealth, and by humanity. We are genuinely, genuinely grateful to you, and you moved us very deeply, Your Majesty.
Well, there the King is in Krakow. This will be his first visit, of course, to the concentration camps of Poland. And he's meeting with many members and representatives of the Jewish community, the Holocaust Remembrance Alliance.
Yes, well, I believe we can be joined by our royal correspondent, Cameron Walker, who is at Auschwitz. Cameron, thank you very much indeed. Just how important is this for the King? We know he's done a lot of work to remember the Holocaust and anti-Semitism in the past, but this is the first time he's visited Auschwitz itself.
Yeah, it is, Emily. It is the first time as any British head of state has visited this concentration camp. And King Charles's words there are incredibly powerful, incredibly emotive. I heard it in his voice there. Just last week at Buckingham Palace, he said how important it was for him to be here in Poland at Auschwitz for the 80th anniversary of its liberation. He talked of it being a sombre but sacred moment, remembering the 6 million people who were murdered by the Nazis. Most, of course, were Jewish, but many Roma as well, LGBT, political prisoners. The King talked about just there in his speech. He talked about the violence and hatred, recalling the depths of how far humanity can sink and saying it's vital to challenge prejudices. He also talked about the dangers of the re-emergence of anti-Semitism, a theme we've really talked about throughout the day here. We, of course, spoke to a Holocaust survivor here on GBNews who was just 5 years old when she was brought to Auschwitz with her mother in June 1944, and says the anti-Semitism she's experiencing today is alarmingly similar to that they experienced in the 1930s and 1940s. And I think King Charles's message there was really one of, we can't be complacent about this. We need to make sure this never happens again. What you see behind me at Auschwitz-Birkenau, the site where 1.1 million people lost their lives, was not built overnight. It started with very small acts of exclusion, violence and hatred. And that's really what the King was talking about just now at the Jewish Community Centre. And it's poignant for the King being there just now because it was a centre inspired by him. When he visited Krakow in 2002, he was shocked really that the Jewish community were literally wiped out by the Nazis in the 1940s, and slowly but surely it started to rebuild itself. And then in 2008 he returns to the Jewish Community Centre to open it. And then, of course, it is poignant for him to be back here today in 2024 on the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz, saying that it gives him a sense of hope and optimism of how far the Jewish community in Krakow has grown. But he says in this post-Holocaust world, we really need to restore faith in humanity and be kinder and compassionate to each other. Well, the King will be making his way to where I am shortly, to Auschwitz-Birkenau even, for this special commemorative service with other world leaders, as well as around 50 Auschwitz Holocaust survivors. And the King is expected to lay a candle at one of these freight trains which brought thousands of prisoners into the camp, and most, of course, were executed in gas chambers on arrival. He's also going to be visiting Auschwitz I, walk through that famous gate that says Arbeit mein frei on it, translated from German into English. It means work can set one free, and as the Queen said last week, that was probably one of the most horrible lies in human history. So the King will be experiencing that too.
Really, really powerful, really, really moving to see, so many world leaders to be attending the commemorations today. Do we know who else will be attending alongside the King of the United Kingdom? What other countries will be represented here?
Yes, we do. A number of countries are being represented, Tom. Of course, we've got the President of Poland, President Duda. I'm told that President Zelensky of Ukraine is going to be here. President Vladimir Putin, understandably, probably isn't here. I'm told he's not welcome. He was here for the 60th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz 20 years ago. We're also expecting the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, as well as a number of other European royalty too, including the King and Queen of Spain, and I think the King and Queen of the Netherlands. Now, there's been a bit of a question mark as to who is representing the United States here, Tom, today. Of course, the new government, led by President Donald Trump, has only been in office a week. I understand there are rumours that it is J.D. Vance, the Vice President of the United States, who will be attending. Now, I must stress that has not been confirmed by organisers here or the White House, but that is the strong rumour here this afternoon.
It looks like the King has just bid farewell to everyone in the room there and has just left after giving his speech in Krakow, Poland. It's particularly poignant as well, being 80 years since the liberation of Auschwitz, to consider where we are with anti-Semitism now in this country, and we've seen a horrible rise in anti-Semitism, in hate crimes against Jewish people in this country and across Western Europe, actually, and this should serve as a reminder of where that hatred can go.
Yeah, exactly, Emily. And I was speaking to one young Jewish member of the community here in Krakow yesterday, Jana. She works at the Jewish Community Centre, and she was saying that she was really disappointed that there was a massive pro-Palestine protest happening in Krakow yesterday, and there's an even big one planned for today, we understand, and she was quite fearful about it. But I spoke there about Tova Friedman, the 5-year-old Auschwitz survivor who came here with her mother in 1944, and saying that she's really worried that the lessons of the Holocaust, which obviously ended 80 years ago, have not been learned by the world because of this rise in anti-Semitism, in particular since the October 7th attack by Hamas on Israel. And she has told GBNews that she worries that the anti-Semitism now is very similar to that of the 1930s, before atrocities like Auschwitz-Birkenau behind me happened. So here's her story.
I was with my mother when I arrived, and the first shocking thing was that the suitcase that we packed so carefully, and we thought it's our property, we had some pictures there, was taken away from us immediately. The smell was overwhelming. And I remember, what is that? And she pointed to the smoke. And I knew right away what it was. She didn't have to explain it to me. The burning of the bodies. She never covered anything up. She was pretty convinced that the only way I will survive is if I knew the dangers and I protected myself. The other barrack of the girls was taken to the crematorium, so I assume we were going to go too. We started walking, we were in pairs, and I heard my mother's voice, and she said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "To the crematorium, to the gas chamber," as if it's an everyday walk. And we got there, we got undressed. We stayed there for hours, freezing. And on the way back, the women were still out there. And I heard my mother's voice, "What happened?" And I said they couldn't do it this time. They'll do it next time. Almost apologetically that what was supposed to happen didn't. I just want to tell you, children knew, and this was our expectation in Auschwitz, that we have to die. But then this army came, and they were like it was like angels, you know. And they were shocked and they were happy. And I remember a Russian soldier came over to me, and I was exactly 6 years and 4 months. He picked me up in the air, and I looked at my mother, and she smiled. So I knew it was safe. And then, of course, we got food, which was a miracle in itself. I'm going to be speaking out until I can't speak. The world is in crisis. It's very scary to watch the anti-Semitism spreading, especially on campuses, where there's supposed to be freedom of speech. And people are marching against Israel, against Jews. And it's frightening that the intellectual people have joined the movement. And that's exactly what happened in the 40s when they burned the books. This commemoration is not only a memory, it's a reminder and a warning for the future.
Tova Friedman there talking about her experience of Auschwitz, and thanks to my colleague Eleanor Smith for conducting that interview for us. This afternoon, King Charles will be here alongside other world leaders. As we've said, he is expected to lay a candle at one of the freight trains, which has been specially put underneath that infamous gateway with the train tracks running into Auschwitz-Birkenau concentration camp. It packed thousands of people into these freight trains to be brought into the centre of the camp, and almost immediately a vast majority of those people were sent to the gas chambers. Those that did survive the initial selection succumbed mainly to disease and starvation. And when the Soviet Red Army came to this place exactly 80 years ago and opened the gates, they found only 7,000 survivors, incredibly weak but alive. And those 7,000 survivors, of them, only 50 are here today to tell the world what happened to them. And this is probably the last time, the last big commemoration where Auschwitz survivors will be here, because they are all in their late 80s or 90s. And as the King was alluding to there in his speech at the Jewish Community Centre, it's up to the next generations to continue their story to ensure atrocities like the Holocaust never happen again.
Cameron, I must say, as you've been speaking, we were seeing some of the footage from 1945, from when Auschwitz and other concentration camps were liberated. And I have to say, to the journalists and the filmmakers who went into those camps, who made the decision to record for posterity what happened there, what an important job they did. Because there are all of these stories about how people would refuse to accept the reality, the horror, the scale of what went on. If this footage had not been recorded, people were unlikely to believe or understand or even just conceptualize the industrial mass killing that went on in Auschwitz, Auschwitz-Birkenau, in so many other concentration camps all across Europe. What an important moment for the record, and what an important moment to be able to look back upon.
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. And it's places like this, Auschwitz, it's now a permanent museum here, so thousands of visitors a year come and see the atrocities for themselves. And as I said at the beginning, Tom, it's the scale of this place that gets me. It really was an industrial, very well organised and efficient killing machine. And you talk about, you see the old footage. Well, when the Soviet army came here 80 years ago, the SS, the armed Nazi guards, had already destroyed the gas chambers, trying to cover their tracks. Of course, the sites where so many people lost their lives in the most horrific circumstances. So I think talking to people who have experienced wandering around the sites here at Birkenau and also Auschwitz I a little bit further on down the world, where that infamous death wall stands, and wreaths were laid this morning by survivors, King Charles going this afternoon, does serve as a permanent reminder of the horrors, and also reminds us really not to be complacent, because there is a rise of anti-Semitism and other forms of hatred, and it started like that before the camps like this were built. So I think it is, truly something we should all be thinking about today.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for being there for us. GB News royal correspondent Cameron Walker there in Auschwitz. It's, of course, an incredibly bleak place if you have visited.
Yeah.
And yes, just the enormity of it. And there are still people out there who deny the scale, deny it altogether. Quite incredible, despite the amount of documentary evidence and everything else.
If you go and you see sort of in some of the outbuildings, the piles of shoes, the piles of glasses, the elements that were stripped of these people to really make them not people, to turn them into numbers, to then systematically destroy them. First destroy their humanity, and then their lives. I mean, the scale of, I mean, the hair that was shaved off all of the prisoners, and we're seeing on our screen now the shoes, the glasses, the piles and piles and piles of these things. I mean, how anyone could deny this?
1 million Jewish people killed, died at Auschwitz alone. And then, of course, you had Roma gypsies as well. You also had some Soviet prisoners of war who died there too. Some Polish people as well. Quite incredible, the scale of it. It's so important to remember it. 80 years on, just 50 survivors there this time around. I believe there were over 200 10 years ago. And
this will be, let's not beat around the bush, this will be the last significant anniversary where there are survivors. I mean, for the 90th anniversary, for the 100th anniversary, it's very unlikely that anyone will be around who remembers it, who can tell the story.